Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, crusade is starting to take shape. The Secretary made a shocking pledge about it yesterday during President Trump's cabinet meeting. Let's take a look at that.
We are going to know by September. We've launched a massive testing and research effort that's going to involve hundreds of scientists from around the world. By September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic, and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures.
RFK Jr. has not yet offered any details about what the study will involve or how it will be different than previous studies. Trump also echoed Kennedy's message yesterday. Let's watch.
There's got to be something artificial out there that's doing this. So you think you're going to have a pretty good idea, huh?
We will know by September.
There will be no bigger news conference than that. So that's it. If you can come up with that answer where you stop taking something, you stop eating something, or maybe it's a shot, but something's causing it.
Dr. Neil Stone took to X to call out Kennedy, writing, "Anyone who claims that they will crack such a complex problem in 5 months is a fraud," which is exactly what RFK Jr. is. He also added, RFK Jr. is not on a mission to discover the cause of autism. He is on a mission to blame it on vaccines. Kennedy is indeed a long-time vaccine critic. He has pushed discredited theories that blame childhood vaccines for problems with developmental development. It is important to note that decades of research has concluded there is no link between vaccines and autism. But nevertheless, we will be waiting for our RFK Jr.'s report in September and his findings. I am very skeptical of RFK Jr., as regular viewers of this show know. I think that he has a propensity to push junk science, and I think that that could cause real harm in this case and in others. I note that the person who is going to be leading this study is a man by the name of David, I believe it's pronounced Geyer or Gear. He was disciplined more than a decade ago, according to the Washington Post, for practicing medicine without a license. I think that RFK Jr.'s beliefs about vaccines and autism are, at least in broad terms, pretty clear. There was the famous 1998 study that proposed such a link and was later retracted, and the British person actually, Andrew Wakefield, who was behind that, was struck off the medical register. As we noted in the introduction, there have been numerous studies that have found no link.
Yeah, I think studying what causes autism is a really worthy underlying goal.
I agree with that.
But I do agree that the timeline is absurd. 5 months, September, right. I don't think anybody believes that that is at all possible. I don't even know how you could conduct a full study of that nature in that amount of time. And I am concerned that because of RFK's views about vaccines, some of which I agree with, some of which I don't, will cause him to look at this issue rather myopically and not in its totality. So those are my concerns with it. And yeah, I want this to be done in the right way because I do think it is actually really important.
No, absolutely. And I mean, look, I think that any major condition or ailment or problem in the health sphere is obviously worthy of proper study. The thing is that there have been an abundance of studies on this topic. I mean, just to set as a counterpoint to the one in 1998 that was withdrawn, there's a Danish study, and it studied in thousands and thousands of children over 7 years, and for almost half a million children, and found no connection, no difference between the risk of autism between those who had been vaccinated and those who had not. And I think to your point about the brevity of the study, that seems to me to just fuel the idea that this is a study where the conclusion or the desired conclusion is to be set at the start, and the things that should lead to a conclusion are going to be manipulated or shaded in that way. And I think that's very, very dangerous. On the point of autism, which is of course a serious problem, I mean, it just seems to me that one of the reasons for the spikes in autism rates is in fact an increase in diagnosis, and the fact that I think a decade or so ago there was seemingly a shift between, autism used to be diagnosed primarily with people who were suffering from what we would now think of as severe autism, which is obviously a very debilitating condition. Now there is the whole sense of the autism spectrum, which tends to, I think, lead to much broader diagnoses, and that does not necessarily mean an actual rise in the problem.
Yeah, I think the diagnosis is one part of it, but not fully explanatory. And one of the main reasons that I think that is true is because we have not yet seen autism diagnosis rates level out as we would typically see with an increase in diagnoses. For example, with left-handedness, around 1960, you started to see actually the level of people who were left-handed start to level out because they got over the sort of fear about a child being left-handed.
Yep.
And we actually saw similar things in the gay community, where the number of people, gay men who were identifying that way, leveled off around 2019, 2020, and the rates stayed relatively the same. Meanwhile, we've seen a massive explosion in bisexual women, which is very fascinating. But we have not seen that similar leveling off of autism rates, even though we've had now 35 years of more acceptance and diagnoses of that nature. So I do think there is something more going on. Of course, I couldn't possibly say what it is. I would also say, in general, I think it's important to not reflexively rely on old studies. And I'm not saying that the studies that you're referring to on vaccines and links to autism are incorrect, but I think on a general principle, it is important sometimes to go back and challenge our assumptions.
Sure.
Marty McCary, who is a new member of the Trump administration, had a really fascinating book, Blind Spots, which was one of my beach reads this past summer. And he talked about how so many base assumptions made by medical doctors have found out to be based on junk science. For example, the idea that peanut butter allergies can be avoided by not doing early exposure to things like peanuts or peanut butter in your children. And it turned out that was actually the exact opposite of recommended advice. You actually should be giving your child small amounts of peanut butter to stave off allergy when they're young. Things like people shouldn't be eating egg yolks because they cause high cholesterol, when the benefits of eating egg yolks far outweigh the risk of higher cholesterol. And is high cholesterol even necessarily a huge problem if you don't have some underlying heart condition in the first place? Should older women be doing hormone replacement therapy to stave off osteoporosis and other problems with aging because it severely raises the risk of cervical cancer? It turned out that wasn't really true. So I do think it's nice to have people in the administration who have this sort of general perspective towards science, that it's not always settled. On this particular issue, I do worry much that you do, that this will not actually be a full look at the drivers of autism and will be primarily focused on vaccines, which I don't think is necessarily wrong on its face, but it's a little bit too myopic.
On the point that you raised about all the past things that has changed, I entirely agree, and I think it is one of the great strengths of properly conducted science that it is iterative, right? You come up with a thesis, you test it, it seems to be right, you think that looks right, and then someone comes up with further studies or further experiments that call that into question, and the scientific consensus shifts in some way. And obviously that is literally how we acquire knowledge, is that it accrues over time. That seems to me different from the Kennedy perspective, where I do think that he's starting off with a conclusion, and that's not where you should be starting off. The other thing, just on a general level about health, is his statement is that we will find the cause, but there is not a cause of heart disease or stroke or any number of health problems. There's some suggestion, for example, with the autism thing, that maybe it could be related to exposure to pesticides. There's some question that maybe very premature babies are more prone to it. There could be all sorts of risk factors, including, of course, genetics. But the idea that we're going to find the cause in 5 months, I think that's...
Yeah, I think risk factor is a good way of putting it. I will also add one final point of skepticism on this, is that there would be massive liability if he were to find that there were some pharmaceutical answer for the driver of autism. Can you imagine how many families are going to sue pharmaceutical manufacturers? This would be quite the test of whether or not RFK is truly divorced from those groups if he were to go through with this, and I'm curious to see what happens there.
Fair enough.
Up next, the language police hit the Masters as allegations erupt around the gifting of valuable tickets to government officials. That's next.